Hi everyone, welcome to AI for Educators Part 2, Integrating AI Across Your School. We're going to get started almost straight away, so just by way of a little housekeeping before we go into the main slides, you'll notice that you've got access to a chat and you've also got access to a question box. We don't, in this webinar environment, have the ability for participants to unmute and ask questions, but feel free to use the chat or to use the question box. I'll keep an eye on both as we go. If you click onto the little apps tray, you'll also see that there is a links option. So I've put a few links in there already that are relevant to today's session, and I'll also put a link in there for the slides from today as well. So you'll be able to come back in using the exact same link that you've used to join the session today, and you can go and access the slides and click into some of those links. We should be finished by 5:15 at the absolute latest. So feel free to ask questions. I know lots of people also use the recording later on, so you don't need to use the chat during the session. I certainly won't make anything dependent on you using the chat. So if you want to just make a cup of tea and be listening to this with your feet up, then please do. So my name is Hannah. I'm the Director of Schools at Stylus. This is part 2 of a series of 3 sessions around helping teachers and school leaders get up to date with AI and with all of the progress that's being made. So some of you might have joined us at session 1, where we were looking at some of the common terminology around AI and defining what is the difference between artificial intelligence and computer vision and generative AI. We looked at some of the technology under the hood, if you like, that's going into enabling LLMs. We looked at some examples of how you might prompt and how prompting actually works as a process. And then we looked at some more advanced prompting and ways of being able to get up and running and developing materials to use within the classroom. So I know a lot of you who've registered for session 2 were at session 1, but if we do have anyone on the call who hasn't had a chance to join or watch back session 1, the QR code there will take you to an unlisted YouTube link. So you won't be able to find it if you search just typing in the name on YouTube, but that QR code should take you straight there. So please feel free to go and watch it back. If you think it'd be useful for anybody else in your school, you can just share that link with them as well. So today we're going to be talking more about integrating AI at school level. So having looked individually at some of the ways to get going with prompting, we're going to focus on how this starts to become part of a system or a process that happens across your school. So we're going to start with the landscape right now. Then we'll think about identifying where to start in terms of who should be involved and what you should be working on in school. We'll touch on safeguarding and staff training. The final section is around future-focused career programmes, but having looked at the attendee list for today's session, I think I'm right in saying that we are exclusively primary colleagues on this call. So some of this won't be as relevant to primary as it is to secondary. So we'll do a slightly shortened version of that, but you will have the full slides available in the links tray at the end of the call. So landscape right now, this is going to be a flying tour of where AI is up to. So since the current academic year began, we are literally talking in the last sort of 3 weeks. We've had the UK's first teacherless AI classroom launch in London. So students are going into school, but they are not going and sitting in lessons. They are purely being taught through LLMs. We've had Oak National launch Isla, which is an AI planning tool, to mixed reviews from what I've heard. Some people quite happy with what it's generated. Some people can see there's still quite a lot of teacher input needed. Apple Intelligence has confirmed its December launch in the UK. OpenAI, which is the company that brought us ChatGPT, has announced it's created an independent board with the power to stop it releasing OpenAI updates. So I've seen this sort of touted as its way of avoiding a Skynet situation. So it can be bypassed if anyone thinks that it is acting recklessly, if that's the right word. They've also launched a new model nicknamed Strawberry. So this is in reference to sort of previous experiments with LLMs that have found if you ask them how many R's are in the word strawberry, they aren't able to answer that question. So this new model has reasoning capabilities that should mean that we're not seeing those problems happening anymore. And we've also had the UK government announce that they're putting funding in towards generative AI solutions for teacher workloads around assessment and feedback, which was great news for us at Stylus because that is also the area that we work in. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on, but there's also a lot happening in a really short space of time. And since we very first started running these webinars right at the beginning of this calendar year, the progress has been huge. So the number of new models, the first time we started talking to teachers, we were talking to them about having to pay to access the best ChatGPT models available freely for them to access. So huge amounts of progress. Things are more accessible than they ever were before, but it also means that it's an awful lot to try and keep up with. And the rate of progress in terms of the performance of these models is particularly impressive. So the tweet on the left there, this is from March of this year. So even since then, AI will be performing better than it was when it prompted this response from Kevin Fisher. So he showed Claude, which is, for those of you who haven't tested out lots of different LLMs, Claude is like another version of ChatGPT, if you like, another company's ChatGPT equivalent. So he shared with Claude his quantum physics PhD, which nobody seems to understand, but Claude did. And then on the right, we can see some analysis of Claude's that was looking at what we call a needle in a haystack test. So this essentially means putting tiny little bits of information. I think of it as being a bit like Easter eggs in a Marvel film. Maybe not quite the same, but tiny bits of information amongst the swathes of other information that LLM's been provided with, and asking it to go and isolate that particular thing. So, excuse me, the team that built Claude were doing this test on the program, and they slipped in a little reference to pizza toppings and then asked Claude to go and find that reference. Not only did it manage to do that, but it also managed to identify that it thinks the pizza topping fact might have been inserted as a joke to test if it was paying attention. So a little bit of self-awareness there. And that, again, really took them by surprise. So these models are progressing incredibly quickly. The video I'm going to show you now, again, is from slightly earlier in the year. This is one that ChatGPT team, OpenAI team released. And this is looking at speech-to-speech reasoning. So I won't play the whole thing. You will have the video linked if you want to go and watch it through. But I think this is another incredible example of how far this technology has come in a very short space of time. On it. So I'm going to pause that video there, but a couple of things to flag that build on what we talked about in the very first session. So in session one, we talked about LLMs and ChatGPT and this most recent technology sitting at the intersection on the center of the Venn diagram with three different things. So one of those was around computer vision and computers being able to see, read and interpret information that's presented to them. One was around language processing, so the NLP, and computers being able to talk, to express ideas in a way that feels like we're conversing with them. And then you had the decision-making side of it, the artificial intelligence side. So when those three things all come together, you end up with something like ChatGPT that can not only hold a conversation with you as though you were talking to a real human being, but can also read and interpret prompts that you're sharing with it, and can make decisions about the best way to handle various commands or requests or prompts that you're feeding into it. And what we're seeing here is going another step further, where the robot is able to not just see and interpret and distinguish between different things on the table, hold a conversation while it's doing it, and then make judgments at the same time. So this ability to sort of put trash away and talk through why you chose the apple over the other devices. There's this interpreting, this is an apple, this is a cup, one of these is edible, one of these isn't. Being able to verbalize what's going on and then being able to talk through your reasoning while you're carrying on with another instruction. I think that's a great example of just how far this technology has come. Now, this is the point where clicking onto the next screen without playing the video is always a challenge. There we go. That was quite good. So given the rate of progress, it is impossible, I think, for anyone who's not fully immersed in this all day, every day, to be able to keep up with everything that's going on. So if your approach as a school was going to be based around having someone who's on top of all the latest AI updates, and they're going to be feeding this through to all the rest of the school, and you're going to be cutting edge, riding the crest of the wave, it's going to be really difficult to do that alongside having a full-time job, which is already itself very demanding, because there is so much going on. So when we're identifying where to start, it's not to do with picking the newest or the coolest or the most powerful technology and finding out how that could be applicable to your school. It's much more about looking at school first and then looking outwards to see where technology might support. So we'll have a recap first of what is AI best suited to, which again builds on some of the themes from session one. So we know language tasks. We know it's good at dealing with language, more so than it is dealing with numbers. And this is all because of the fact that it's a predictive model, not a search engine. Now, I say that with the caveat that some of the most recent models, so Strawberry being one, are starting to have much more improved ability to handle numbers and calculations. But broadly speaking, particularly if we're talking about things like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, language is what it's better with. It can predictably hold a conversation and use words much more than it can predict the correct solution to a maths problem or be able to count numbers, handle numbers. So when we talk about language tasks, we mean summarizing, we mean simplifying, and we mean turning one text type into another, so that element of translation. And we've talked about this in terms of simplifying reading age of a text, or being able to take a set of exam reports and summarize those into one single student-friendly handout. It's really good at things like creating quizzes, so assessment, lesson planning support, particularly with GPT-4. It's very good at being able to follow templates, being able to sort of question back and forth, help you with your own reasoning around what to teach, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail slightly later on. It's good at generating images. I've again caveated that with no text. And that's because, again, the predictive nature of this technology means that when it builds you an image of a cat sitting on a flower pot, it's doing that based on everything it's seen of cats, everything it's seen of flower pots, everything it knows about what an animal looks like on top of an object, and how a cat might position itself when it's sitting. It doesn't have the same level of training data with every possible iteration of what language might appear in that image. So generating images with text, you'll find that it will quite often form things that look like letters but aren't. That said, there are some tools now that are much better at incorporating text as well, and I'll give some examples of those right at the end. Simple explanations or examples, or any sort of differentiating, it's great for. So particularly if you're looking at ways of supporting scaffolding for pupils in your class that are struggling to access the main curriculum, AI can be really helpful for that. And role playing, I mentioned that one earlier. So we've seen lots of examples of, getting ChatGPT to pretend to be Shakespeare, so we can ask it all about why he presented Macbeth in the way that he did. So how do you decide what to prioritise from this big list of things? There's a few factors to consider, I would say. So what processes are repetitive, first of all? By the time things become really, really repetitive, we're moving away from where a human's expertise and insight can always be essential. So there's certainly bits that involve human judgment, but anything that's repetitive, it should be relatively straightforward, depending on the task, to get AI to support. Processes that require synthesizing or processing large volumes of information. This is a great example of one where I'd be looking to start. So as a former secondary teacher, I would get my year 10, year 11 mock exams back, and I'd sit with a stack of them at my desk, and I couldn't wait to see what they'd written. So I'd flick through and see all the references to things in their Macbeth essays that we talked about that week, and you get some where you go, oh, that's fantastic, they've done so well, and some where you wonder if they've been in your class for the last 2 weeks. And I would be convinced that the next day I would remember this and I would know what to say to those individual pupils. And I was massively over-egging my own ability to synthesize large volumes of information. It's something that I think humans feel like they're good at sometimes, but by and large, we're really not. You might be one of those people who is very good at remembering how they did on their mock exams or how they did in their writing assessments the following day. But actually, if we asked the average human to recall how that compares to how they were working 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, across a whole set of criteria, you would probably struggle. And likewise, being able to say off the top of your head exactly how every single pupil in your class is getting on with using various different comma rules in their writing, very difficult to do, very easy for AI. Processes that are causing the most pain for your team. So this one doesn't have to be an IT-based process. We're going to look at some examples in a second of where things that feel on the surface like they are very human, classroom-based problems could actually be alleviated just in places by AI. So we're not looking to solve the entire problem, but we are looking to sort of chip away at the edges until it becomes something manageable. Again, processes that make you think it's not worth the time it's taking, but it has to be done. Data entry is a really good example of this, and data analysis. Sometimes it can take a really long time to do. It can be a real slog. It has to be done, but does it need to take as long as it does? And then actions or events that reoccur and that are time heavy. So similar to this first one around things that are being repetitive, anything that you can say quite reliably, a template or a structure or a format is going to follow. Let's start by seeing if AI can speed that up. And above all, processes that can be overseen by someone with good prior knowledge. So in this case, if we're looking at, let's say, letter writing, and every term we're sending home a newsletter to parents that tells them what's been going on in the school, or every half term we're sending home letters about trips, and maybe that's something classroom teachers are doing, maybe that's something office staff are doing. What we don't want to do is take our brand new member of the office team and go, here you go, here's an AI tool, here's the details of the trip, just go and use it to write a letter and then send it home, job done. We need someone who knows what a good one looks like, overseeing, because as much as the AI outputs are getting better and better, we can't ever assume that they're perfect. So whatever we're outsourcing to AI needs expert eyes. And over time, as we get better at it and we know what to expect and we know how to get the best out of the AI system that we're using, that expert will be able to get away with putting less and less time in. But certainly at the beginning, we want to be checking really closely. So overarching principles to help you decide, how are we going to disseminate this information? So once we've narrowed this down, we've picked the area, we've identified the pain points within the school, how are we going to make sure that everyone in the school knows how it works? Who do we need to train? When do we need to train them? What channels are we going to use? Is this an online thing or an in-person thing? Is this a new folder on the staff shared drive? Is this a set of video resources? I have a tool that I'll share with you later that you might use for this. And then we start with the problem and not with the AI. So the problem is the thing that we're trying to fix. The AI is the tool with which we're going to try and fix it. And we're going to start with the AI output, but we're not going to use it exactly as it is. So we might find that, say, the problem is to do with summarising behaviour logs over the course of the year. Maybe you've got your year group leads, or your heads of year, whatever you call them, sitting down and having to read through pages and pages of SIMS reports and then produce analysis of behaviour. Maybe what we're going to do now is every week they're going to be sharing summaries that they've generated using AI. Perhaps one person champions it and they're going to train everybody else. It might be that the first time all your year leads get together, your champion will show the others how to do it. Next time we do that sharing process, we're going to do it all together, but expect a little bit more independence. Maybe 3 or 4 sessions in, they'll be absolutely fine on their own, and we're just focusing on the output. So it's simple things like that where we narrow it down to what do we want at the other side of it, who's going to oversee, who's going to lead, when are we going to make time for this in the school day. So we're going to look at some practical scenarios now. And this is just a selection of ways in which AI might help. So it's not exhaustive by any means, but hopefully a good starting point for how you might start to think through some of these problems with AI in mind. So scenario 1, you've taken over line management of a new team. So let's assume that you're managing a subject team, and it's a team whose results are lower than others in the school. So they're inexperienced and you need to support that subject lead in getting results up. But let's also assume that this isn't a subject that you yourself are expert in. So for primary colleagues, there's a good chance most subjects you'll have taught at some point already yourself. But if we look at something like maths, where a lot of people are really, really confident and a lot of people really aren't. Maybe you're one of those people who's not led maths before, you're not totally confident, you haven't been going to all the maths CPD, but now you're expected to improve maths results. Could apply for any subject. So key here is that you've got no prior knowledge of the assessment criteria, and you don't know whether people's being adequately prepared. If you've only ever taught year 6 and you're trying to improve Key Stage 1 maths, that's going to be a challenging thing to do when you don't necessarily know what a really strong maths lesson or maths planning looks like. So how could AI support? So first thing we can do is go back to examiners' reports, any sort of standardisation materials, any sort of government level centralised report, and ask ChatGPT to summarise the main points. So we want to know what top, mid and low candidates' responses look like. If we're talking about non-exam years, we want to know the characteristics of really effective teaching. So Ofsted subject reports might be another great place to start here. It might be that you can use EEF reports as well. Maybe there's some research there that you can ask ChatGPT to summarise. So what does the top end absolute gold standard look like within this subject area, the mids and the low? Then we might, if it's appropriate, ask ChatGPT to turn that into a student-friendly document. So this works better for subjects where you've got a little more subjectivity. It's less clear-cut than just here's 10 questions, you've got 5 of them right. But giving students something that gives them a sense of what their teacher's looking for or what really strong performance in this subject area looks like could be really helpful. In terms of record keeping, recording line management meetings on your device and having AI transcribe the minutes. We do this as standards within Stylus, so we're using Sana at the moment as our transcription tool. I've also used Otter before and found that to be really good. This would have been one of my pain points when I was teaching, because I always had good intentions of writing up my notes straight away and circulating them as soon as the line management meeting ended, and then recording it centrally and agreeing all the actions. And usually what happened was we finished and we almost hit the bell and someone had break duty and we went flying off in different directions. And then life happens, school happens, and suddenly 2 days later, I'm trying to remember what we discussed and interpret my handwriting. So this is one that would have saved me a lot of time. Then getting ChatGPT to summarise those meeting notes. So once you've got a transcription, it's pretty straightforward to just set up like a standard set of prompts that asks it to summarise that transcription under particular headings. So with Sana, which is the tool that we use, we've got those plugged in already. So after we've had a meeting where we've invited Sana AI into our meeting room, if you're meeting in person, you can just set this up, or you can open a dummy Teams meeting or a dummy Google Meets meeting and set it to record. And within about 15-20 minutes of the meeting ending, we receive all of the notes and the action points labelled by different people who were present sent to us on email. And this can all then be stored centrally. Pasting into ChatGPT the last term's lesson observations and having it summarise the most frequent feedback. So again, if this is a department that you're new to, perhaps you're new to the whole school, getting hold of that previous data and saying, well, what's been coming up? What have we been talking about? What have been the areas for development? How have those changed? Potentially a lot quicker than having to go back and read through every single one. And that's not to say you wouldn't read through the ones that are really key, but getting that summary can help with that managing large volumes of information, synthesizing large volumes of information and drawing out things that maybe you've missed. And then we prioritize those for staff development. And then finally, getting GPT to do some analysis for you. So input your assessment results and get it to spot your trends, spot your underperforming groups, spot the key questions that you need to ask of the data, of the subject leaders, of the teachers. Not all of these are directly going to support you with actually going into lessons and knowing what to support on or sitting down and doing planning. Some of what you'll be doing as a line manager of a team that needs to improve results is very human-centric. It's building relationships. But to be able to do that, the idea here is we take away some of the admin times, that 10, 15 minutes you might be spending typing up minute meetings. Instead, you can spend it having a slightly longer conversation, looking at a lesson plan or looking at a piece of student work. So next example of supporting a new pupil. So another common one, someone's joined partway through the academic year and they've come from a school that followed a really different curriculum. So there's loads of missing knowledge there. Where you might, particularly if they're older, be able to get away with just giving them some printouts or saying, here's the book we're reading, go and read chapter 1 to 6 at home. We can't do this for this pupil. They've got low reading age. They struggle with reading comprehension. They wouldn't access those materials on their own. And they're in a class of 31 other pupils, and the class teacher is worrying, very understandably, about how to help them catch up and then keep up. So how can AI help? So first thing we can do is drop in what we've covered in the curriculum so far. So take that large body of information and just bullet point it into key concepts. So what are the things that this pupil really needs to know in order to catch up and access the next parts? Then we can specify that it should use student-friendly language. We can ask it to be really friendly in its tone. We can ask it to have a particular reading age. And now we've got something we can share with that student and with their parents, potentially with any other staff who might be supporting them as well. And something we can, start to tick off as they catch up on those things. We can go back and get it to generate retrieval quizzes. We can specify how we want those answers to appear. So maybe it's a gap fill, maybe it's single sentence response, maybe it's single word response, maybe it's got multiple choice and you're asking them to select correct answer, maybe it's all of the above. But again, speed up time by building those retrieval quizzes that can just be quick to mark. ChatGPT can even mark them for you, and you'll then be able to get a sense of how quickly they're catching up. Getting it to create letter templates so you can keep parents updated. So by this point, you have got a summary of the key concepts in the curriculum they've missed. You've got a summary of how they're doing on these regular retrieval quizzes. You've got something you can share with them. So it may well be that we're then just condensing this information and saying, right, ChatGPT, I need a letter that explains this is what we've done this week. These are the areas that they've caught up on. These are the areas they're still working on. Here are some resources they're going to be working on for homework. We can take our key texts, so if we do really need them to be doing some independent work, we can get ChatGPT to summarise each one. So if we're looking at things like articles or scenes of a play, particularly those where summaries might not be readily available online or might be too complex for the student to access, we can get GPT to do that for us. And we can also get it, again, to support with that scaffolding, to go and provide the words and a definition for any less familiar words within that text. So I've tried this one before with Victorian literature. I've just given it some Dickens and said, pick out all the words that you think a student of whatever age would find really challenging, and then supply the definition. And then maybe we even turn that into a little quiz afterwards to check that they've remembered. And finally, dropping the reading age of text where appropriate. So we wouldn't do this necessarily for class readers where the text is the thing that they need to be able to access. But if we're talking about sources that are fed into a history project, say, can we get away with giving them the key information but not using the original text in the interest of letting them catch up? Then finally, developing a staff CPD programme. So if you're planning staff CPD for the whole year, you've got tons you want to cover, you've got research you want to do ahead of time, but you also know that doing like a new thing every week is no good. You want to revisit ideas, you want to start to differentiate. So perhaps you've got a set of ECTs in your school who need to just get the basics secure, and then you've also got your teacher who's been there for 30 years, walks into a room and everyone falls silent. They probably don't need to be working on the same behaviour management strategies that your ECTs do. So we want to do a bit of differentiation, individual needs, and also take into account that what works in music may not work in DT, may not work in history, may not work in maths. So first thing we can do, again, is go back to the lesson observations. So let's look at what's coming up across the whole school and prioritise that when we're planning those sessions. We can use Perplexity, which is a great online tool, to go and find relevant research papers. So it in some ways functions like Google in that it is going and searching for you, but it will give sources. So if you ask it to look for research papers for you or anything around like what constitutes high quality feedback, it will give you the source that it's found. And then we can turn those into summaries for staff bulletins using ChatGPT. This middle one is one that, again, some of our team use at Stylus. So get ChatGPT to role play as someone really experienced in that specific area. So if you're working on assessment for learning, say, within your lesson, you've got your lesson plan, you share it with ChatGPT, you say you're an expert, you're like Dylan Williams' right-hand man or woman when it comes to implementing AFL in a lesson. So here's my lesson plan. Where are my missed opportunities for AFL? How well have I done it? And you get into that conversation. It can challenge your thinking. You can challenge it to argue one side and then say, well, what if the opposite was true? Can you argue that? What if it turns out that at this point, none of my students know what to do and we're not ready to move on? What should I do instead? So having those conversations back and forth can be a really useful way of progressing your thinking. We can record CPD sessions. So in the same principle we were talking about with line management, record the CPD, get AI to transcribe it, and then get ChatGPT to summarize key talking points and actions. And I will show you a tool, hopefully if we've got time at the end, that will also turn it into a podcast for you, which is pretty cool. And then finally, the actual practical organisation. Paste into GPT all of the available CPD slots, all of the topics you want to cover, and then ask it to design you a timetable. So you say each session is half an hour. Here's how I want the outcome to look. Here's how often I want topics to be revisited. What can you do? And it will almost certainly not be perfect first time. But again, this is where we build on the resilience we talked about in session 1. You go back, you correct your prompts, and hopefully you get something that works for you. So the key thing through all of these, it is not about going straight into the core of the problem and saying, we've got an issue because results in this subject aren't strong enough and AI can't teach the subject for us, so it's not appropriate to fix this problem. It's all about creating the space for the bits that only you and only your teaching team can do as humans and as experts and as skilled professionals, and getting AI to take away as much of the surrounding admin and noise as possible to let you do the stuff that only you can do. So hopefully some ideas there to help you approach that. So when it comes to systematizing these efficiencies, one possible way you might approach this is an open AI license for your school. So I said that ChatGPT has made its newest models free. That is for individual accounts. I actually can't remember now what the fee is for a whole team, but for a relatively small fee, you can get a paid OpenAI license for your school where everyone is added into a single team. So this is similar to a model called SLT AI. So I'm going to share that and then talk about why for this part of the session, we're actually going to look at OpenAI instead as an alternative. So SLT AI is one that came recommended from a teacher in a call that we had. So it was a discovery school, and they said, we're using this. So this is where I'm going to be doing a lot of switching of screen shares. So you have to bear with me while I jump between several different windows. And now my SLT AI has gone missing. So let's do this whole window. Right, so you might get a little bit of an Infinity mirror for a second there. There we go. So SLT AI is essentially, rather than getting you to have to search the entire pool of training data, much of which would be completely irrelevant to get answers to questions and prompts, has narrowed it down to all of the policies and the guidance and the things that are publicly available to schools. So the idea here is when you're asking it to support with things like improving attendance or character reference writer, you're looking at everything that's out there already that's relevant to schools and education and sort of narrowing down the pool of information that prompt will draw from. So it's very much designed with schools in mind to create documents that are useful to schools. I think it's a really, really good idea. The reason why we are in this bit focusing on OpenAI as a possible way of doing this is because what you can do with OpenAI is set up your own school account that's private to you and lets you personalize this output. So what you're going to get here is going to draw on information that's publicly available. If you want to draw on information that is actually relevant just for you, OpenAI can work for that. And how do we do that? We go on to this exploring creating your own GPTs. So I've just signed into my regular ChatGPT account here. And if you go to the top right there, you'll see this big black button that says create. And if we click into that, we get the option to go and build new GPTs. If you remember from session 1, building your own GPT means taking all of that technology and rather than just using it as a conversation bot, which is what ChatGPT is, you build one that's very much tailored to your needs. So what you can do here is configure it by giving it a name, giving it some instructions around what you want it to do, suggesting some conversation starters, some questions people might ask when they sign in, and then uploading any files that are relevant to that. Now I'm actually going to jump over to show you how I built the one that I'm going to show you here's one I made earlier. So I decided I wanted to build one for ECTs that would be like a demonstration of how you might do this. And the idea would be, this is a GPT that helps ECTs or new joiners to the school understand my school policies. I didn't want to put in real schools policies to this. So I thought, well, I'll get GPT to write me some. I'm a school governor across a couple of schools, so I am very familiar with the process of having to go and review policies, write policies. It can be a real slog. So what I did was go and open a new conversation, and I said, I'm a head teacher, I need to create some new policies for my school, can you help? And it said, yeah, sure. So I gave 3 that I've picked because I thought they would help me with my demonstration GPT for the next part of this. I gave it something a bit more specific. So I said I work in Suffolk County Council, so I need it to draw from common ideas from other Suffolk primary schools. That's obviously not true, but I thought that will help narrow down what we're searching. So then it gave me some slightly vague bullet points around a teaching and learning policy, a behaviour policy, and an online safety policy. And I thought, well, that's okay, but I've seen policies before and that is not nearly enough detail to get what I want. So I went back to it and said, I want actually help with the full policy. So it did offer this to me here. So I said, can you give me specific sanction ladders for these following things? I picked those because I thought I might debate them later. Teaching and learning, I've again given it some prompts for things that I want to include. And now it's gone and created me one from scratch. And this is actually not bad. As a starting point, rather than me having to sit there and write this from scratch, this would save me a lot of time. So here are some of my sanction ladders built around the things that I asked. Here's my teaching and learning policy. So here's how we structure a lesson in, I think I've called it Hannah School. Here's guidance on using IT and using videos. And now I've just copied and pasted this and saved it separately. As we were saying earlier, this isn't the finished product. We don't just copy paste this and then send it off to governors to review, but it is saving a lot of time as a starting point. So then I went back to start to configure my own GPT. And this is Hannah School's mentor bot for ECTs. So I said that I wanted it to be friendly. I wanted it to give advice on policies. I'm also able to specify things that I don't want it to do. So these are some of the conversation starters that I picked out. I think what I'd said, I didn't want it to use any reference to anything personal. So I don't want it drawing on actual people data. I just want it referencing policies. So that's my mentor bot. Now you see it, the privacy up top here, it's currently only viewable for me. I can set this so only people within my school team could see it. And now I've got something that can be shared with staff. So if I go back into my mentor bot and imagine now that I'm an ECT who's just joined Hannah School and is having a bit of a nightmare, I might say, I need help. A student in my class keeps shouting out even after I've sent them out. What is the school policy on this? So it's going to go and reference all of my school policies. And there it is, flagging my behaviour policy and suggesting what happens next. If I was then sitting planning a lesson at home and I found a really good video that I want to use, and I'm thinking, can I put this in? What was the policy on that? Rather than have to go back and find where the teaching and learning policy is saved, I can just say, what's the policy on using videos in lessons? And it's going to go reference it at Hannah School. The teaching and learning policy provides clear guidelines. So here is, again, things pulled straight from that fake policy that I wrote earlier. So this can be as personalised as you like. And because it's private, you can put on your actual references, your actual policies. You can put on information about your school that you wouldn't want others to see. And this is totally private within just those people accessing it at school. And you could also have a number of different GPTs that are all fulfilling slightly different functions, which means that when I'm asking a question, if I just type in the @ there, I can actually jump between them. So there's a few that I've used before. English Marking Bot is one that I've mucked around with. UCAS Reference Helper, likewise. So if I've got questions in the same conversation, I can be calling on these different GPTs to help me with the response. So this could be something that is just given out to new staff as standard that lets them go and find the information they need, go and use information to create tasks or to fulfill duties, whatever it might be, without having to slog their way through a massive set of policies to find the right information. So if I switch back to our slides, I think I'm right in saying that that is the last time that we're going to be jumping between screen shares. So let's see. So the data is private. We could have a line management GPT that is our knowledge base. We could have a catch-up GPT that is very specific to that school. We could have our CPD schedule that draws on freely available documents across the web. And the disclaimer here is that none of us at Stylus work for OpenAI. We're not affiliated with OpenAI. We don't take any money from them. This is just our thoughts. So you've got a couple of options there. SLT AI, if you want that general calling on freely available policies online. If you want to personalize it and build something just for your school and just for your teachers, consider OpenAI. If you want to go the homemade way and you don't want to pay for another license, what you can do instead are some of these tips for sharing and learning and giving shortcuts to the shortcuts. So a champion, we've mentioned it before, it's always the best starting point. So who is going to be the go-to AI person in your school in one particular area for one particular task? Maybe everyone knows that Sarah in room 4 is the one who's always using AI to write really good quality letters. So if you want letter writing, go and see how she does it. And maybe Paul upstairs in room 10 is the one who builds really amazing quizzes with AI. So he's our champion if you're looking at actual resources. You might TLR it. You might then have a shared directory where you're giving templates for sharing prompts or use cases or links. Here's a GPT that someone in the school has found really useful that's publicly available. Here's a guide to the prompts you might use if you want to write a letter. And again, you keep this up to date so people know to keep going back and checking it. Embedding ways to encourage staff to dip in. So like carousel sessions or magpieing or having like 5 minutes in staff briefing when people share what's been going on. So a show and tell AI slot in department meetings, say. And then compiling a list of school vetted tools. And I will share our Stylus vetted tools with you in just a second. Speaking of tools, we've just received funding to go and explore the time-saving potential of AI for teachers. So we are, for those who haven't come across us before, we are an assessment and feedback company. So we are looking at how AI can transform the feedback process and save schools time. And to do that, now that we have this funding, we're recruiting schools for projects across primary and secondary. So we're looking at different subjects. We've got English and science already up and running. We've just started onboarding schools in maths literally this week. So you can sign up for free to take part in one of those projects and see if we're right, that we can save you time. So the QR code will take you to our projects page where you can register interest, and it is also linked in the links tray on here. So in summary, where to start? Having a policy is bare minimum. This does not mean a whole written policy that governors have approved and ratified, but it does mean that you have, a starting point of, are we going to let teachers use AI tools in school? Is AI an acceptable tool to use to plan lessons? Where are we saying don't use AI? Where are we saying, or who are we saying shouldn't use AI? And that's probably going to be the pupils. Having an approach is really sensible. So this comes down to things like having your champions identified, your staff briefing slots identified. But the more you can weave it through policies and use those vetted methods day to day, the better. So we're going to have more and more in terms of uses, opportunities and dangers of AI. So the sooner you get started, the more up to date you are. Okay, which brings us on to the safeguarding update. So we're going to start with another short video. So this is from a guy called Chris Goodall, who I know from LinkedIn. And I just think it's a really cool video to use as an intro if you were going to start any sort of assemblies or staff briefings looking at some of the dangers around AI. There's some good questions raised in this. So I will stop talking and hit play. Okay, I'll pause that once we've got the credit to Chris up on the end there. So first thing that blows my mind in that video is the fact that every single one of those images and the music completely AI generated. None of those are real people. And if that doesn't give a dazzling example of how powerful and how much potential this technology has, then I don't know what will. But I also really like this focus on we're the ones in control. And I think particularly for teachers, there are a lot of people out there and a lot of companies out there who are trying to sell AI tools and trying to show you how to use AI. Obviously, I count myself among them. And there are a lot of people saying how it's going to completely transform education, and a lot of people saying how it's going to completely destroy it. And really, the only people who get to decide which versions of these are true and which tools are useful versus which ones are just money down the drain are you guys, the teachers. So the more that you can be in the conversation, understanding the technology, understanding where you need it, where you want it to help, where you want us, the people building and developing the stuff, to spend our time supporting you, the better. And in that way, we end up with an AI that really is fit for purpose and use cases that really do support effective teaching and learning and aren't just sort of slapped on at the end as a bit of an afterthought. Again, there we go. So this new round of technology is all originated from a Google DeepMind paper published in 2017. And what was particularly special about this paper was it proposed transformer technology. So where AI used to have a number of separate fields, all of which operated independently, what this paper did was propose how transformer technology could bring them all together into one sort of unified tool, if you like. Transformer technology is something that we went through in session 1. So if you've no idea what I'm talking about, check out session 1 using the link from earlier. And I should also add these slides credit to Centre for Humane Technology and their talk AI Dilemma, which is where we've borrowed them from. So when all those tools come together, this is then enabling us to do things like, this is what AI makes of Google Soup. So we talked about bringing together decision making and the ability to read images and understand language. And this is how AI sees the world. when you ask it for Google Soup, it thinks about what Google is, and it thinks about what soup is, and it makes a decision about what the two would look like together. And this, just an interesting insight into how it works, but also shows potential for where it can go. So we're suddenly seeing these new capabilities emerge that we hadn't seen before and we weren't prepared for. So the examples on the screen here show the impact in terms of AI's ability to learn and carry out functions according to how much training data it's been provided. You might expect not that it would be like linear progress, but it would be maybe a slightly smoother curve. The more you train it, the more you give it, if you like, it gets gradually better over time. And what no one was really predicting was that there was almost very little progress and suddenly there was tons. And I think the Persian example on the right there exemplifies this. So this is an example where an LLM that had never spoken Persian, if I can use that verb choice, had never seen Persian before, was suddenly introduced to the Persian language, given some examples of sort of translation pairs across other languages, given tons and tons of Persian to read, didn't understand it, suddenly fluent. And this is what's happening now that we haven't seen happen before. And what we weren't expecting is this sudden rapid jump in what this technology can do and the speed with which it goes from not being able to do something to being able to do it brilliantly. And the potential here is huge. So the example we're seeing on the screen, this is where AI is shown initially an image and the brainwaves of someone looking at that image. And you train it on loads of examples of these. So here's someone looking at a giraffe, here's someone looking at an elephant, here's someone looking at a cat, here's someone looking at a nice sky, and each set of corresponding brainwaves. And then you give it just the brainwaves. And based on all of the training data it's received, it was then able on the right to attempt to recreate the image. And look how close together those are. This is just a computer with a bunch of brainwaves that is almost able, almost perfectly, to recreate this image on the left. It is not far off. And this means we are going into territory where AI is literally able to read minds. And that then enables something like this, where a human patient, quadriplegic, is able to play Mario Kart with his mind. That is the positive potential of AI. But there is another side. And what they talk about in this AI dilemma talk is this idea of first contact, second contact. So when we had this initial wave of social media, when the internet was suddenly available in everyone's home and on everyone's phone, and social media was suddenly a thing that we all participated in seemingly overnight, these are some of the negative effects that we saw. And you'll be familiar with these. These are not new things that we've been talking about. So shortened attention span in particular, I think, is one that comes up a lot. Doom scrolling and staying up until a stupid o'clock because you've been pulled into a YouTube or a TikTok algorithm. And these problems with polarization, seemingly we're all either one thing or another, and there's no grey area when it comes to a lot of debates. But we've had time to tackle this. So we've seen, I think it was last week, Ormiston Academy Trust announced that they're going to ban phones across all of their schools. Eton likewise have introduced rules to ban smartphones. There's WhatsApp groups springing up all around the country of parents getting together saying we're all going to buy our children just brick phones with no internet. So we've had a chance to tackle this. We're now going into second contact, and this is AI in 2023 onwards. So some of these are less familiar and they're more frightening because the technology is better. Automated cyber weapons, synthetic relationships, reality collapse, fake everything. I mean, that video that I shared a few minutes ago, when you look at something like that and you think that's how good the technology is, suddenly it does become very difficult to get a sense for what's real and what's not. And this is the world that all of our young people need to learn to navigate. So the challenge for us is coming up with ways to help young people negotiate and navigate these changes. Deepfakes ahead of the election is a great starting point for some of these conversations. This is just a snapshot of some of the ways in which we might start to integrate safeguarding updates around AI. Sadiq Khan talking about fake AI audio of him, so completely fake, generated using other clips of him speaking, which almost led to a serious disorder. We've seen filters, incredibly realistic filters now circulating on TikTok that mean if you're growing up in the social media era now, there's a good chance that you could be browsing your timeline for hours at a time before you see someone who's completely unfiltered. And that's frightening. That impacts on young people's self-esteem. And I think most frightening of all is how slow the law has been to keep up with this. So it was February of this year that it became illegal to share intimate deepfakes without consent. This means on the 4th of February, you were able to AI generate nudes, which use the face of real people, and this could be real young people within a school, and pass those around, and that was not a crime because they weren't real nudes, they were AI generated. That is now, as of the 5th of February of this year, criminal. Do our young people know that? Are they aware that the law has changed? And if the law is not keeping up, where does our duty as educators, as parents, as governors, as anyone who has any sort of contact with young people, where does our duty sit to make sure that they're being kept aware of this? So there's a few starting points there around conversations to have around safeguarding. And finally, this is the part that I'm going to skim over fairly quickly, because like I said, we've got mainly, I think exclusively actually primary colleagues on this call. So in terms of future focused career programs, there is just one point that I want to hammer on here. We see a lot of scary things about AI potentially replacing 300 million jobs. And certainly there are jobs that are going to become less in demand as AI takes over. But that also means it creates its own wave of jobs. So key to being successful and competitive in the careers that will be available by the time our year 6s and our year 11s are finishing school and graduating university is knowing how to wield this technology. And as scary as it seems, this is something we'll touch on in the third session as well. But this isn't new. It feels like we're suddenly in this world where half the jobs have been eradicated and half the roles won't exist because AI can do them. But actually, we've had moments where we introduced something new and we thought that that would solve a problem or eradicate a problem or eradicate a process, and it really didn't. I'm using dictionaries as an example here. So I would imagine if you teach English, or if you've gone into an English classroom, you'll see that there are dictionaries everywhere. Potentially even on every single table. And yet, if you look at students' work, does that mean they're not making any spelling mistakes? It certainly does not. In maths, we provide pupils with calculators. We have an absolute expectation through school that they will bring a calculator to that lesson, even a scientific calculator. And does that mean that suddenly all of them are getting top marks in their maths exams? It does not. So all this new technology actually means for our students is a slight shift in terms of the skill that they need to demonstrate. Having knowledge on its own is probably going to be less valuable in this AI era, but being able to wield it is even more important. And that means particularly if you are a teacher of a subject where students are quite often saying to you, what's the point in this? Why am I learning this? Your answer quite rightly can be, you're going into a world where it's not about what you know, it's about what you can do with what you know. And if you can demonstrate that you can take a load of information and you can adapt it to different contexts, you're ready for a world in which AI is ubiquitous across the careers market. I'm going to skip over the Gatsby benchmarks and go straight to this point around turning skills into action. So a few starting points when we want to sort of AI ready our students as early as possible. We need them to be resilient. So this could involve things like creating text suitable for particular groups. We need them to be able to demonstrate logical thinking. And we talked in session 1 around that if-then sort of pseudocode. For older students, this could look like writing a prompt to mark an exam question. If you've used this word, then award the mark. If you haven't mentioned this, then do not award a mark under this particular criteria. We need them to be precise in their language. That is the key to successful prompting. We looked in the first session at how contextual references could help generate images more aligned to what you intended. So for art teachers, history teachers, anyone in humanities, like knowing those contextual references suddenly becomes really key. Challenging students to recreate an image through really precise word choices will show them just how much the decision to reference a downpour rather than drizzle, rather than sleet, rather than hail can impact on the image that comes out the other end. And reciprocity, this is all only possible because of the willingness of companies and of individuals to put things out and to share with others. So find something out about what you can do and go and share it with others. And this habit of like the information is there for all of us, it's up to all of us to help each other out, is again really key skill for moving into an AI powered careers industry. And finally, self-evaluative. So being able to go back and look at what you've done, look at the output, look at if it's what you wanted, make the corrections. For anyone who's worried about students using AI to cheat on assessments, challenge them to go and use ChatGPT to write a full mark answer for your chosen exam board or your chosen assessment criteria. It's a lot harder to do than you think. And actually their ability to notice why it is or isn't a top mark answer is pretty good revision prep. In session 3, we go into a lot more detail around avoiding things like plagiarism. So finally, tools that we use and recommend, which I'm going to talk through really quickly because we're at the finishing time. We use Sana for recording and summarizing meetings. Cursor, which is a coding tool that will let you code in natural language. So rather than have to have a basic understanding of coding to start, you can just describe what you want it to build and it will go and generate some code and then describe the bits that you want to fix. It's saving a huge amount of time for our team. Perplexity I mentioned, so that's the answer engine that gives you the sources as well as the answers. Midjourney is the AI image generation tool that seems to be a little bit better on using text than some of the others. I mentioned creating training resources or showing people how to follow processes. Tango is a tool that will help you create software training guides. So you literally just go through the process on your computer. You click when you move on to a new part and it will just remember all of those clicks and then compile it into a training guide for you. Suno is the AI music generator. I'm pretty sure it's the one that Chris was using in that video earlier. I think I saw that referenced. And it's also just fun. So you can use it to generate songs about anything for anyone. And again, you just reference genre. And then finally, Notebook LM, which is hot off the press. I discovered this last week and I love it. You drop in resources that you found from the internet. So you paste in links to online study guides, web pages, anything you like. It will then generate study guides for you and it will generate podcasts. So you could use this to do something like drop in a load of learning walk feedback. Say everyone's been challenged to use Hinge questions in their lesson that day, or everyone's challenged to use assessment for learning strategies more broadly. Drop in all of the things they're doing well, and then you'll get a 6-minute podcast where 2 AI generated Americans, a man and a woman, have a conversation about what they've seen and what's been working. So it's just another format for getting that information across. I've posted about this on LinkedIn. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, my surname on there is Gillott, Gillott. I've put a little example of how I've been using Notebook to support with some revision. So 3 minutes over time. Thank you if you're still with us. If you want to join us for session 3, the QR code will take you there to register. Session 3 is focused on people approaches to AI. So it's looking at hands-on avoiding plagiarism, a little bit more around safeguarding and how you might start some of those conversations with pupils, and tools, ways in which pupils can benefit from AI as well. So QR code will take you there. Give us a follow on Twitter or X if you have it. We're at Stylus Education. We're also on LinkedIn as well. And thank you very much for joining me. I hope it's been useful and I hope to see you at session 3.